What we need right now is a clear message to the people of this country. This message must be read in every newspaper, heard on every radio, seen on every television. This message must resound throughout the entire interlink. I want this country to realize that we stand on the edge of oblivion. I want every man, woman, and child to understand how close we are to chaos. I want everyone to remember why they need us.
Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher, and socialist Annie Lipson, and community advocate Gemma Sotomayor. Gemma, Aburto Sotomayor. And we're online at whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as at Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications. And share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. All right. I'm reporting here from Colombia, Bogotá, Colombia, and both of you from San Francisco and Oakland. I'm still here in Colombia, and let's do this. We have a topic that you've suggested, Andy. And this topic that you've decided we should do is one that we haven't actually discussed with Gemma, and that is the issue of what's happening at the border with Texas and their ruling in the Supreme Court and the whole administration and Texas rule over state versus federal rights. And Gemma, this is your opportunity to really share with our public what you think the issue on the border is, or how it should be solved, or what your position is on any of this. I think that will be a lively discussion. Did you want to add anything to this, Andy?
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, I do want to hear what Gemma has to say about that, but I do think there's a lot to discuss about why is this crisis? First of all, is there a border crisis? And why is it coming up? And why is it coming up now? Because a lot of people are thinking that this is a result of some either giant political collision between the Republican and Democratic Party, or it is an existential moment in relationship to an invasion that's taking place in our country. And if we don't do something, that this country will lose its identity and, will be overrun. Those are some of the kinds of things you're hearing. And those sentiments are expressed not just on the right, but from the left. Obviously I've mentioned Jimmy Dore and folks like that are talking about the porous borders that are there and saying something has to be done about it. But Glenn Greenwald also came up, that was his kind of line as well. And again, me and you, Eduardo, have been pretty clear that we have no interest in allowing the state the right to monitor that border. We're not interested in state borders, not just interstate borders, but the borders that any states say that they have to really control the flow of workers in any direction. So we have not heard Gemma weigh in on that kind of stuff. Is she open borders or not? But I think most of the discussion I hope to have is actually about this recent decision and really the way it's being politicized. And I think politicized in a way that is very much in the interests of organizing people back under the U.S. state and getting people to support their candidate and ultimately to reinforce the notion that have been degraded during the COVID years, that the state is there to protect you, and we need to help the state protect us. So I want to discuss it.
Right. Should we give some context to what's happening? Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to go. Maybe do you want to do it, Andy?
Well, I'll maybe I can do it. But Gemma, do you want to say anything in relationship to any of this?
No, I have my points. I have a couple things that I want to mention, and yeah, but I think that they'll come in the discussion. So if you want to give kind of the audience just a background on what's going on.
Okay. I guess in a place called Eagle Pass, which is on the border between one of the regions. The border from Texas and Mexico is long. I mean, but I don't know, 1,000 miles long or something like that. It's many, not 1,000, but hundreds of miles long, I'm pretty sure.
No, it's
But
more than 1,000. I think it's reaching 1,300 because you have to,
okay.
and also for California.
Okay. And then at a place I think called Eagle Pass, I can't remember what the town is. Um, the the governor of Texas had decided to put additional razor wire along what I think the border is the Rio Grande River, is mostly made up of that, and there might be a wall there. There might be a fence there. If there is, I don't know about it, but I think it's largely a geographic barrier. That's the Rio Grande River, and since that was not considered enough, I guess the governor of Texas a few years back, I think at least a year ago, had decided to, and maybe a few years back, had decided to put concertina razor wire along sections, miles, 30, 40 miles of that stuff. And maybe roughly a year ago, federal agents had cut into it, saying that this thing was interfering with them doing their job and them being able to process immigrants and things like that. Of course, those agents were then accused of this is the government supporting open borders, allowing immigrants to flow in. That's not really what the federal government was saying they were doing. But there was a suit that Texas brought against the U.S. government for saying, no, you can't come in here and cut our concertina wire. And there was an appeals court that basically supported Texas, and I think that was about a year ago or somewhere within that year. But then recently, the Supreme Court has come out and said, no, the federal government has the right to cut that stuff if it wants, and if it must do it. And basically, and I think it was a 5-4 decision. From what I heard, there wasn't much stated in the decision. I think mostly it's been people commenting about it, but I haven't read the decision, so I don't know. But what I heard was there wasn't much to be said in either side, the 5 majority or the 4 minority. They just kind of made their decision. But from my understanding, if there's any, to the extent that I care about the legal basis of this, the federal government reserves the right for it to define what it does with its border, and it's not up to states to decide those things. That's roughly what I think the issue is being talked about. Although, frankly, I don't even think that's really the issue. But I guess that's as much as I'll say.
I know that.
I'm sorry. And then people just lost their minds. And then once the Supreme Court did that, people just went nuts and said, "Oh my God, the federal government is trying to create open borders." And it really it presses on that point that's in the freedom movement, where the freedom movement is not into so much freedom. It's basically saying, no, we have to keep immigrants out, and we don't like that Biden is for open borders. Sorry.
I just want to add to that it was also surprised that it was 5-4. A lot of legal experts were saying that this should have been a landslide because it's clearly stated in the Constitution what the powers of the federal government are. And that is when it comes to borders, because it deals with the international relations. And by Texas putting up this barbed wire, you are jeopardizing your international relation between the United States government and that of Mexico. And not just Mexico, because it's a lot of different migrants that go through that border. And each country has its own has the right to advocate for how its citizens are being treated internationally in other countries. So it goes into international relations. Ultimately, that's where the federal government's powers are coming from, and that's why a lot of legal experts were just in shock that it was so tight. And it makes sense when you look at the sway of the Supreme Court right now going mostly Republican, right? And I also do agree that there's a lot to say as far as it being an election year. And a presidential election year, more importantly. So, yeah, but we can get into that.
Amy Coney Barrett, if I remember that Supreme Court justice name well, I feel sometimes far removed from U.S. American politics here in Colombia now. It's like these topics made me come back to the politics out there. She is a conservative, and she was thought to be, she's one of the 2 conservatives that sided with the liberal justices. And as you say, Gemma, there's widely suspected that she did this because of her stance. It's about more about foreign policy and the government's responsibility to deal with foreign policy issues rather than the state to do that, right? But the lower court did side with Texas, and then the U.S. Supreme Court gave those emergency powers. But we'll see what happens as these things unfold. Did you want to say something, Andy? That's all I wanted.
I mean, I just want to get into like why I think this is nonsense. Like, and I don't look. I don't give a shit about the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it's a fucking authoritarian. You get to stay there forever. I don't give a fuck what they say. I don't care what the 5 said or the 4 said. They're all fucking monsters, and they represent a monstrous system. And I don't give a fuck about this border because it's there just to allow capitalists to basically control workers while they just send money one way or the other. And again, this country, which talks about its border, also says they have the right to the Monroe Doctrine, which says we control the fucking South America. Well, here's a case where you broke it, you bought it. So it fucks those. It says it controls Central and South America, screws those countries over through the Monroe Doctrine, saying no one else can come in here and cut any deals in this region. And then, when people are harmed by U.S. actions, then, well, it's going to use all the harm that it's doing to people in Central and South America to now scapegoat them in a time when people should recognize that their real enemies are somewhere else. And once again, people are being fooled and people are falling for the nonsense. And yes, it's racist. Yeah, partly. But really what it is just plain ignorant. You are being, do you not see, I'm not saying him, I'm saying all you folks who are not for open borders, do you not see that the people who have stripped mine you of wealth in these last 2 or 3 years are suddenly off the docket, are not being talked about? The fact that the richest 5 billionaires, or the 5 richest people, doubled their wealth over the last 2 or 3 years, and now they got you talking about these people crossing across the border, across concertina wire. You think there's something up there, folks? You think that maybe they've got you, they've redirected you somewhere? Or maybe you were angry about the war in Israel or upset about the war in Ukraine, and now they've got you looking at something else? You think maybe there's something there? That's what's pissing me off. And I can show some other things about like, oh, it's an invasion. Oh, it's they're stealing our resources. Oh, they're stealing our fucking jobs. It's crazy. What's taking your goddamn jobs is AI. Wake up. So I'm just frustrated with this. That's so I'm. I have some things to show, I'll say.
Good.
So I am for a hybrid of open borders. So I do believe that people should be able to move freely across countries, and I'll explain my position on that. However, I do think that there does need to be a checkpoint for human trafficking, because human trafficking is a real issue. And I think that if you do just open them completely, then you're allowing for that. Now, I know that's kind of a cop out, and that's what a lot of the arguments are for people that say you need borders to keep criminals out. But I agree with you, Lipson, in the sense that, yes, this is a circus and it is being used to diverge attention. Just to give you guys numbers, because essentially, to me, the United States has a big lobbying machine, and we forget that. We forget that a lot of the ways to pass policy and even budgets is through lobbyists. And if you look at what sectors the government funds the highest, it's going to be anything linked to military, anything that's linked to security. The budget for the border for CPB in 2023 was $16.4464 billion. Plus an additional $1.5 billion that was given for emergency. In 2024, it's at $25 billion. And in addition to that, Texas is passing an additional emergency bill of $1.5 billion. That money is not going to process immigrants. That money is not going to help the border crisis. That money is going to private companies that are militarizing the border with additional security cameras. So if you're really upset about these migrants coming and stealing your resources, what you should be upset about is where the government is funding. The government is funding private companies. They're not funding humanitarian issues. It's not the people that are crossing. And that's where I have a problem. So from a capitalist view, I have a problem with how money is being spent, because I do think that money needs to be spent, but not in that way, not the way that it's being allocated. So I do believe that the migrants are being used as scapegoats to fund these companies, similar to how the three strikes law was used to, because prisons are private, they're not run by the government. So the more people you incarcerate, the more money these companies make, right? Same thing. So I do agree with you, Libsyn. But me coming from, well, how do you tackle the issue? Is you have to look at what the real issue is. And you can argue, well, the issue is all the destabilization that we've done in Central and Southern America and the need for why the migrants are coming up here, which I would agree with you. Historically, yes. But how would you remedy that? If you say, well, we're going to pull out, we're going to stop interfering in these countries, yeah, do it. But the damage is already done. So how do people pull themselves up? How do people improve their livelihoods? They still have to go to a country that offers those options, or what they think those options are. So I don't think there's any way of stopping migration. Even before there were borders, people were trade. I mean, borders existed just for the purpose of saying this is one country, this is another country. People move freely around there for trade, for commerce. You're still going to need to do that. You're going to need to allow for people to move freely through commerce. And people don't want to come here and stay here. People want to come work and send money back. If you look at all the studies, that's what people do. People don't want to live here. They're forced to stay here because they know that if they leave, the likelihoods of them being able to come back into the country are null. I have some other stuff, but I know you're taking down notes. You probably want to address some of those, Libsyn.
Well, let me see if Eduardo, you want to say anything.
I guess I have a question for him, so I'm not misunderstanding your position. You're saying that there should be points of entry then? That vet? Is that it?
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, you just go in. You don't have a criminal record, or you don't look like you're not bringing suspicious package with you. Go right ahead. Just move freely.
Right. So she's
as long as you want to.
She's for some kind of border. She's for a border, so it's fine. Don't agree, but that's where she's coming from.
I'm coming from the human trafficking ass.
I understand.
But I do want to make a point that for all of this argument of security, we need to stop these delinquents from coming into the country. Just, again, if people stop just hearing what politicians and stop hearing what news are telling them and actually look at the numbers of people that are coming in, for the amount of migrants that have come in, the percentage, I think that they reported something where out of the 3.2 million people that crossed the border last year in the fiscal year, so up to September of 2023, only 119 were considered terrorists on FBI's watch list. The amount of money that the government spent to deter 119 terrorists, potential terrorists on the FBI watch list. I mean, you're not effective. You're throwing money. You're not dealing with the problem that you're afraid of. You're really not. You really don't care, because that's not where you're focusing your attention on. That's just something you're throwing out there to get people's attention.
All right. Well, I guess so. But if that's the case, then you don't. Do you agree or disagree with a form? Because I don't see when you travel from California to New York, there is no, or when you travel, like when you go on a car, you're not, or you're just going to Nevada, there is no port of entry that is vetting or checking people to see if there's harm, or if you're a terrorist, or there's nothing like that when you're going from California from California to Nevada, for example, when you go to Reno, for example, or to Las Vegas. We've all taken those small weekend trips. There's no vetting, or there's no testing, but instead you want people coming from, not because of they're Mexican, but anybody coming from Mexico, whether they're Venezuelan, Colombia, to be vetted. Is that it?
Even in Canada, any point of entry, kind of like Central America, that you can move freely among the countries, but you still have a port where you have to register that you moved. You still get a stamp, but you go in and out. You don't have to present documents. You're able to go and stay and move freely.
Even though we don't do that within these states.
Correct.
All right. Okay. Well, I just wanted to be clear. Now, I don't know if you have a response, Andy. I can go with my position. Do you have something to say?
I just want to say I do. Cause I think the point you made about the companies getting really not just rich off of this, but establishing a section of surveillance and of essentially implementing certain techniques, both electronic and physical, to monitor, control people, and
That
getting
they'll
rid of
sell to us. That they'll sell to us later
yeah,
again.
well, not just sell to us. They will use against us. If anyone wants to, like, look, the Patriot Act, the war on terror, everything that was done there that they said that they were going to do with Muslims, they are now doing internally. And this is a long-held socialist way of understanding the state. Anything the state says that it's doing up to workers abroad, ultimately it has to do internally. And so people have to understand, and even though, like, some of my comrades or colleagues in the National Coalition for Health Integrity think that passport control for vaccines has nothing to do with passport on the border, I think they are completely linked, completely the same thing, completely used, and show that that state is up to no good under any of those circumstances. All of these things. So I feel like you highlighted a very important thing, which is that the authoritarianism that is being built on the border is, people have to understand that these are techniques and methods and tools that will be used internally to control people. And they're going to say it's about sex trafficking. They're going to say it's about, this person had dangerous internet porn on their computer. We're going to control them. They're going to say all sorts of things. The fact is, the most dangerous people on the planet are the ones who are telling us they're going to help. They're going to save us from other people, and it's a lie. That's not why they're doing it. They don't save us from drug cartels. They fund some cartels while they go after other cartels. They don't save us from terrorists because they're the biggest terrorists. They fund terrorists to go blow up Iranian funerals when they need to. And so it's that is, again, a lie that I don't think we can afford to fall for, because every tool that they put on that border is going to be used to control us.
And they're also doing that. They're creating a market. The only reason why you have gang members along MS3, along these routes, putting the migrants in danger and putting migrants in situations where they die because they're being trafficked is because you're not allowing them to move freely. So you are creating a market for people. And look, people are desperate. People need money. And if I'm in a border city and I can make some money by telling people, yeah, I'll let you cross my backyard and maybe I'll put a gang member out there just to make sure that people start paying for it. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I know that there's different points. Then we're feeding into that. We are creating the market for it. We're not stopping it, and you're not going to stop it. You don't have, the United States, doesn't matter how much money they throw at this, they don't have the resources to be able to stop that. They're going to get more ingenious. They're going to get more creative. They're 2 steps ahead of us. That's not what the government wants to tell you, but they sure
Right.
are.
And I'd like to deal with some of these lies directly. Unless, Eduardo, you want to say something? Okay. Here's a few things I want to show that I just feel like, cut against some of these lies. I got to share my screen. So this is immigration of unauthorized immigrants, not just immigrants, unauthorized immigrants. This is the so-called illegal immigrants. And you know that what we've been told recently is there's an invasion, right? Like the border is getting mobbed. Well, you know when the border was being mobbed and when there was invasion, it was happening during Clinton's years and during Bush's years, right? That's this increase when unauthorized immigrants were coming across, if one was going to be really upset about that. Actually, the peak time was roughly around 2008, 2000, which was around the time of the last economic crisis, which is not an accident. That was 12.2 million. And since then, it's kind of mostly been going a little bit down and really leveled off. The last time it was collected was 2021, 10.5. And I couldn't find statistics on 2010, 22, 2020, on the 22nd or the 2022 or 2023. But it's not going off the charts. It's like basically level. And so this is the so-called invasion that they're like, when they talk about invasion, this is what's been happening in this country. If you were thinking that somebody coming across your border was an invasion, that invasion has already taken place. It took place in 2008. Secondly, the notion that our border is unprotected. This is something I found from Pew Research or something. Annual U.S.-Mexico border apprehensions, went up massively in 2021, 2022, 2023. All right. Whether this was about protecting the border or it just basically means that the thing was militarized and more people were collected and somehow processed. And this is what you're taught. This is your open border Biden policy right here, which is not an open border. The dude is running just like Trump and just like Obama and just like Bush and just like Clinton. They're all running a border operation because they run the U.S. state, which is interested in controlling how workers flow across that thing. And last, there's not something else to say here, but this is what undocumented immigrants pay in taxes. People are always talking about they're just coming here leeching off the resources of the government. Well, no, they pay 1.13 billion in income tax, 3.58 billion in property tax. The biggest one is sales tax, and it's a total of about $11.8 billion per year. And I did find this one. If you compared the taxes undocumented immigrants pay to the income tax paid by on their income, the taxes on their income or state and local taxes versus the 1%, the richest 1%, undocumented immigrants pay about 8% of their income in taxes, whereas the top 1%, 5.4. Now, I recognize people say, well, that 5.4 give more. But whatever, undocumented immigrants put money into the government coffers. And actually, it's not very easy to find out what they take out because often they don't use those resources. This is just some of the things I wanted to show because this is what's going on. And the reason you're being lied to and the reason we're being told this is because Democrats and Republicans, both of them, want you to pay attention to this non-debate issue because they do not have a debate here. There's no division. There's no civil war that's going to happen as a result of this. And that's two parties that have the same side don't fight a civil war. What they do is they pretend good cop and bad cop to fool you. And that's what we're seeing here. And who's the good cop, who's the bad cop, doesn't matter. Some people think the Republicans are the good cop. Some people think the Democrats are the good cop. Doesn't matter. They're doing a two-party fucking game here to act like they have a difference, but they don't. They are trying to get you to think that this actual non-issue for them, and what should be, I wouldn't say it shouldn't be a non-issue for us. The issue should be all workers should be able to freely walk anywhere they fuck please. And that's what our position is. And I'm not going to let any single state, under the guise of protecting children, under the guise of defending women's rights, under the guise of bringing democracy, I'm not letting any state lie to me like that and give them power to control anyone. I'm not going to let you control a drug dealer. I'm not going to let you control a guy who is, yelling out at night, I want you to get rid of him or something like that. I don't trust the state to do any of that stuff because they're the biggest criminals. The state are the criminals and the corporations are the criminals. They're just going after the small fries to fool us. So that's what I feel like is really going on here is people are being duped and it's working. It's working brilliantly to get everyone who thought that they were outside of the two-party illusion to get right back into the illusion. Because for the capitalists, they don't care. They don't care if you're Trump. They don't care if you're Biden. Just get in the game and vote. Because they want to know that you think that you know that what the most important thing is to find somebody to protect you. Find some politician who's going to protect us from somebody else. And once they got you doing that, you're theirs.
Just to add to your point, there's only 5 states out of the 50 that allow undocumented migrants to tap into Medicare benefits. There's only 5, and there's with restrictions. You have to be low income and over the age of 65. So even then, the population is very minimal that's tapping into it. And the amount, and I just want to be clear because, look, I for the next statement, most migrants come here to work and send money back home. And if we're talking back about the Monroe Doctrine and about reparations, which honestly, to me, this blew my mind. The UN has stated that the amount of money that the migrant workers send back home is 3 times more effective than all of the global humanitarian aid that is sent worldwide. So if you want to talk about them taking away our resources and us giving our money to other countries, just let migrants come, work, let them send money back home, let them be self-sufficient, and you can get rid of that. Like, again, I agree with you, Lipson. You're just hearing this bullshit. You're allowing migrants, and I'm not just saying Latinos. I'm talking about all migrants, because migrants don't just come from Latin America.
Correct.
There is I can say right now in Nicaragua, there's a huge migration of Indians. They go into Nicaragua and then from Nicaragua move their way up and that's because of Nicaraguan international policy. Like, you're able to come in without needing a U.S. visa. So you're able to do it. And it's the country, I think, that's the closest that you can do that to get to United States. But just everyone, I agree. I agree with that, Lipson. I do think that, look, as a capitalist, I do believe that you need to allow for fair competition. That is what capitalism is. That includes international competition. This whole bullshit of they're going to take our jobs, there's going to be more difficult. Look at the jobs that immigrants take. They're one of the most dangerous, the one that exposes them to the most type of risks. They're the dirtiest, the hardest, that, quite frankly, most Americans don't want to pay. These companies that tell you we're anti-illegal immigration, we need to protect our borders, they're the ones hiring these workers because they know that they need them. And you can argue, well, they pay them nothing. That's why they want to take them. Well, you know what? If you want to compete and you want to get paid for that same amount of money, you want to get paid more for that job and not lose it to an illegal immigrant, then allow them to be legal and compete for the job and raise the wage. But that's me. Sorry, Eduardo, go for it. This has been the Andy and Hema argument.
No, it's all right. Yeah. I've stated my position before on what's left, so I'm just going to reiterate a few of the points that I have made in the past, just because I think I'm on the same page as Andy. You know, Emma, when we discuss checkpoints or some form of vetting or some form of, there's always, I used to have, it sounds like yours is like a more low key level sort of, okay, check your bag. No, you just got plátanos, whatever. You just move on forward. I don't doubt that you and the way that you think would be to just do something that's minor, right? But we're talking about whole government that's going to be abusing such a power, and we've seen how any sort of checkpoint, even with COVID, we've seen how people use some form of security checkpoint or some form of safety measure be abused, as we've seen with COVID. We've seen how it's been abused with even terrorism, just like with the 9/11. People were discussing how we might have terrorists at our border, whatever. And so I'm concerned that any form, not your form, but any form of checkpoint, any form of security measure is just going to do what we're now doing. I mean, we have now one of the high-tech border security current and emerging technologies in the planet right now. I mean, we're going to get further advanced. I don't know what people want with a wall, because a wall is not going to prevent anyone. You can just climb over with a ladder. There are plenty of videos that you can show. But what we're doing now is we have high-tech infrastructure that is there currently checking, that is not a wall per se, but technologies such as biometric identification, artificial intelligence, that have revolutionized border surveillance and have regulated to inform, how many people are coming in, how many are not coming out. So I have a problem with geofencing more than a wall. I could care less about this. Well, look what happened. Texas put up this little razor wire thing, and what happens? Like, just strip it out. That's all that happens. But you can't get rid of Plan B predator drones that are flying and are surveilling people. And these are the things that were happening right now. I have an article here that I'm looking at that is called publicsafety.eeee.org, which is discussing all the levels of pros and cons of what how to protect the border, or how the U.S. America is protecting the border. And there have been Predator B drones patrolling the border from 19,000 feet that have captured live video and detailed infrared and radar images of people on the ground on the U.S.-Mexican border. And they're being replaced now with expensive military-grade models with smaller, nimbler ones. And these can fit in the back of a patrol vehicle and be airborne within minutes. We're talking about weapons basically being used in the Middle East on our border with people who are trying to either, we've discussed many reasons why people are leaving their countries, economic reasons, love. We've discussed even just trade. Maybe people just want to go here for a vacation and they can't because they can't get a fucking visa because you'll be months or years on a waiting list. Anyhow, so these are the things that are being used. And, the other thing is about privacy issues with biometric identification devices. Recent technological advancements have produced a wide variety of biometric identification devices using physical characteristics to identify people crossing borders. These include digital passports containing biometric data on an embedded RFID chip. They also use fingerprint readers, iris scanners, and network cameras using facial recognition software backed by artificial intelligence. The biometric data is shared across so many platforms with other countries as well. I mean, these measures aren't going to be used to vet people, vet people if they're dangerous or not. It's going to be used if you are treasonous, if you're someone who's speaking out against, it could be used around us. Honestly, trying to be used around people who, like they did back in Europe, when they were trying to get rid of, because that's how these passports and borders came about, to get rid of, anarchists and socialists, and sex workers. I mean, we discussed this with Anna Miller with her book, Love Across Borders, where passports came into play because of the war and because of trying to control workers coming into other countries. And this is what I'm afraid of. And it's interesting to note, I just want to repeat what Andy had brought it up, actually, with Anna Miller. I think this is what you had brought up with the United Nations. There was a discussion around that time. I'll read it here. There was a moment that might have turned the tide. This is from Anna Miller's book. After the Paris Peace Conference, the newly formed League of Nations organized a meeting in 1920 to discuss the future of the passport. Passport controls had proliferated around the world during the war, but many policymakers were still in favor of abolishing borders, their words, not mine, she says, and met to discuss whether it might be possible to ease travel restrictions and restore freedom of movement, no documents required. This was for what? It is surreal to imagine a meeting with the future of freedom of movement hanging in the balance. It is even stranger to imagine a room full of decision makers debating the merits of open borders as a way to pave the way forward for lasting peace. This was discussed. I remember Andy had brought that up. We obviously, that's too late now. We're still trying to fight in this lucha, this fight for the struggle for our open borders. But that's what I fear. I don't fear Hema's way of seeing this. I don't think you're the one seeing it that way. But I know that anybody within power, the abuses of power, that's what they're going to do. And for people listening, if you're still on the fence, I think we have a lot of people on the medical freedom movement, and we've said this numerous times. I don't understand how anybody here could think that the medical freedom movement that was so strong and united, and we were trying to lift voices of left and right, could think that who wanted to have freedom of passports and freedom of papers and all of that could still put themselves in position against open borders. I mean, I mean, that's the antithesis of what people were fighting for back in 2020, 2021, and even 2022. And here we see I'm in Colombia, and we see the effects of all of that. Because after the whole lockdowns here in Colombia, here in Bogota, everyone uses a cédula, which is an identification number, your ID, and you have to use that even to just buy some fucking books. I don't have to do that because I'm Mexican. I don't have to do that. But if you are a Colombian person, and here you have to buy, you go to a shop, you use your cédula, you go get gas, you use your cédula. I mean, it's everywhere. And this is all the effects of after COVID, and here this country shut down because of COVID. My country didn't shut down because, of course, AMLO said that we would die of hunger if not died of COVID. People have made their own decisions if they wanted to shut down their business. But here in Colombia, they did. They shut out everyone. That's why they had the emerging webcam services here because during COVID times, we're watching more porn than ever. And that's when they used a lot of live models here. So I'm just saying what happens, and I'm speaking to the public here. I'm just wondering, where are your principles if you think that we are to have a movement freedom of any sort of regulation? I have this hope that one day people will wake up and see that whatever happens in the military, whatever happens in Palestine, whatever happens on the border, will eventually reach us. And it's already happening. We already have smart tech cities trying to surveillance us and collect our data. And if we just encourage this further, we're just going to encourage people to be. It never stays at the border. It never stays at the war. It never stays in the military. We have the internet thanks to the military. We have many of our technology because of the military. And it never stays there. It does eventually filters down to us, to the regular public, and to our society. And that's what we have to continue fighting for. This is why this topic continues to be a topic of discussion for us, because it is one that is important. It's beyond people just running in humanitarian reasons. It's about our safety. It's beyond, our love stories and reasons why we've given people to think with their hearts and their minds. It's about our safety and our future, and we're just allowing AI to proliferate and to develop. And we've discussed this further, but I don't understand where people's position. I don't understand why people continuously think that this is the way to go.
And I know, Hem, I want to hear your response, but what you said there at the end, Eduardo, this is not a moral issue for me. This is not, these poor people coming across the border. I mean, it is wrong what our country's done to them, but it's not, it is like, this is, to me, feels like a life and death issue that if we don't get it right, then we are doomed to an internal competition that is divided, we will fall. And this is another divide. That's what I see. And so it is, to me, it's imperative that those people who want to fight for freedom understand that we shouldn't go for the way of seeing each other as just competitions, like capitalists encourage us to. If I showed up at Bank of America looking for a job, I'm competing with Hema. I may love her, she may love me, but I'll be competing for that job. That's the reality. That's the situation capitalism puts us in. The only response workers have been able to have to get through that is to instead of competing with each other, because how am I going to compete with Hema? Hey, pay me less. Hey, I'll work harder than her. Hey, she's pregnant. She's a liability. I'm a man. Blah blah blah. I won't have pregnant leave. I'm old enough. So I'm not going to be on leave. You don't have to pay for that. And she's going to have that kid. She's going to be out all the time. So that's the way they get it to work. The only way it can happen is for me to say, hey, Hema, we're both going to get played here. How do we work together to make this thing work for both of us? And obviously that has to go on a big scale. And that's true internally as workers. We compete with each other, but it's also true with workers coming across the border. The labor movement was built by immigrants from Germany, from South America, from Ireland, Europe, from South America, and even from Canada. The labor movement was built by immigrants who were being pitted against each other by bosses, overcoming that and coming together. And in addition to blacks and whites being pitted against each other, and that is what we're going to have to instill in ourselves as a principle, not of, you're being treated so badly, I feel sorry for you, but this is life and death. And if I don't see you as my brother and sister, we're both going to go down together.
Oh,
Go ahead, Eduardo.
did you want to say something, Hem?
Well, I was just going to say that I agree, but that's one of the reasons why I say, for those of you that are buying into that argument that illegal immigrants are reducing the pay, they're not. The companies are doing it. If you allowed illegal immigrants to be legal, trust me, that would not be the problem. Wages would go up because they wouldn't be afraid. They wouldn't be afraid to pick it. They wouldn't be afraid to say, fuck you, these are unhealthy work, they wouldn't. So again, okay, sorry, but go ahead, Eduardo. I did want to say something about yours, but I do want to allow you the floor first.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say, for me, it's interesting how people like to label it. I can see how these elections are playing out. Everyone here is trying to be pushed into two categories. You're either Democrat or you're Republican, and President Biden is being seen as the open borders president. And he's not. He really is not. you've seen. So I have friends right now in a detention center that have been in detention centers now for months. I have not heard anything from one of my friends, and I'm still waiting. I have friends here in Colombia that are going to leave to the Darien Gap, trying to leave immediately. They're deporting left and right now. I don't see how any border, and this is not an open borders person. I think we've discussed what an open borders position is, and we're very far from what President Biden is. And if anyone is following the news, I said in the beginning of this episode that it's interesting because I haven't been listening to a lot of propaganda now that I think of it, but a lot of the news media that I have normally used to listen to 5 podcasts a day. I've been doing other things. Just looking at what's happening on Capitol Hill, the Senate is pushing for negotiations for a bipartisan border enforcement deal attached to military aid for Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, Biden has said that I'm reading something from Democracy Now! I'm not going to use far right because they would like to label. If Republicans, they close this deal with the president, then what will happen is President Biden has already stated many times that he has vowed to use the new emergency authority to shut down the southern border. I mean, I was just telling my roommate who's from Venezuela here at my apartment, I was just saying to him that, everyone thinks that President Biden is going to be the one to save. Stripping little barbed wire is not, the way of, that's not open borders. It's always Trump that I said to Luis, I said, Trump says what he thinks, but politicians they say nice things, but then they do a lot of backstabbing, which is what President Biden has done. Everyone thinks he is the best president for an immigrant. He is not. He is doing the same things, kept a lot of the orders that Trump did, and doing a lot of the things that to keep migrants out. And I'll just read here this headline here. This is from Democracy Now! So President Biden will grant executive authority to block people from applying for asylum once the number of apprehended migrants at the U.S.-Mexican border reaches a daily average 5,000 in a week. That's what he'll do. He'll just shut down. And it's the toughest, and this is his words, phrasing the deal as the toughest and fairest set of reforms to secure the border we've ever had in our country. This is President Biden, the pro-immigrant president, supposedly. So this is AMLO, who is very hypocritical. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, my president of Mexico, says, well, that's not realistic in response to President Biden, right? With all due respect, how are we going to solve the migration problems with walls? How are we going to solve migration problems by closing the border? Why these proposals? Because elections are coming. I mean, I'm like, what the fuck? What are you saying? Why do you have to speak around this when you have closed the Mexican-Guatemalan border and you've also supported the northern border? I mean, I can't have Luis Miguel, who is now co-presenting for the Spanish podcast, Luis Miguel, who was my roommate, I can't have Luis Miguel apply for a visa or even travel to Mexico because he's Venezuelan. That's Mexico. That's not, and this is Mexico trying to criticize President Biden. So I'm just saying that it's hypocrisy, right? And for me, what I want people to stop thinking in terms of left or right, or in terms of Democrat or red and blue, and Democrat and Republican, because both are doing this in elections, as you both have stated as well. There was something else I wanted to say. But I'm not going to... Anyhow, I'll stop there, and if it comes to mind, I'll yeah. I see how Democrat states will criticize the Republican states, but now that there are migrants coming to those states, now all of a sudden they're criticizing these immigration policies, and now they don't want to be held. And I see how workers are being pit against workers because they're like, we can't take any more, and now we're going to stop funding, and we need more resources, and And even, we villainize like Governor DeSantis sending his troops over to help Texas and their troops trying to cover the border. I mean, it's chaotic. But if you see how Democrats, like if you see during AOC was very famous for going from Capitol Hill to the Texas border and criticizing, right? And she was there with her white suit or whatever. And she went and to go criticize what was happening with Trump border policies. I don't see AOC criticizing Biden immigration policies. There are plenty of people right now in detention centers, and I'm not seeing her go and with her white suit and go take the press with her and staring across the fence as if that's going to help any. But, like, I think that we should do something about this, and not in the terms of policymaking. I think that, you see how Trump and Biden play the same playbook. It's beyond that. So I applaud immigrants doing what they're doing and breaking those barriers and crossing illegally, me saying this, and breaking down those barriers and not getting documented, not getting fingerprinted. And they should do more of that. So I applaud people doing it. I mean, fuck the correct way to do it. People are trying to do it the correct way for so long. Look at Luis Miguel. He applied for asylum since September. He's been waiting here in February, and it's how many fucking months? And still, there's no correct way to do it. So if that's the legal correct way, and I mean, if we're going to do it the legal correct way, I mean, it's just really a deterrent to try to stop. And as both of you have said, immigration will never stop. And so tear down those walls, tear down those barbed wire, cross illegally, and join everyone else, because we're all just workers.
I want to add two things. The first one is, this is not just pinning U.S. residents, U.S. citizens, legal immigrants against illegal immigrants. This is also pinning illegal immigrants in the United States versus illegal immigrants coming into the country. Because a lot of people that have their processes, to your point, Eduardo, you saying this reminded me. So my in-laws have been in the process of getting documented, I think, for over 10 years now, and they're still waiting. And a lot of, yes, and mind you, they're doing this the legal avenue with lawyers, with documents, everything, and they're still waiting. And one night over dinner, I heard one person remark as to, I should have just left the country and come back illegal and asked for asylum at the door. These asylum seekers are getting documents way before we are. And they said it jokingly, but I don't think they realize the aggression and the hostility in that statement. And I've come to realize that this machine has also pinned one set of people really that have the same thing in common, that are doing the exact same battle, seeking the exact same thing up against each other.
Yep.
So it's dividing us even more. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, one of the biggest argument is, oh, we're going to lose our sense of identity with all these immigrants coming in. And first of all, I don't know what the American culture identity is. I don't think you guys have one. I'm sorry. But
oh, how dare you? How dare you?
I don't care. Deport me. But, but what I will say is, I'm afraid of U.S. policies being absorbed by our countries, and then you not having anywhere to go, because other countries are going to want to aspire to be like the United States, and are going to want to even retaliate against how their people are being treated and take on the same policies. I remember when I was living in Nicaragua, my previous spouse, we were trying to get him documents to be in the country legally for an extended period of time to be able to work. It's a similar thing to how people do it in the United States. And it was impossible. It was impossible. And in my ignorant mind, I thought, oh, it's going to be easy. It's Nicaragua. What do they care? No. Similar bullshit policies as in the United States. Same bureaucratic mess. Same issue. So it's not even just the United States thing. It's the whole world needs to come aligned. And if you're going to take down the borders, not just take down the border in the United States, it's take down all of the borders. Let people from Africa be able to migrate to Europe. Let people from East Asia be able to migrate. It has to be everywhere, because we live in a world economy. We are not segregated. We are one. Whether people want to see it that way or not, it is. One domino falls in the United States, you're going to see the cascade ripple effect all the way through Russia. There's just no getting out of this. And people just aren't aware. These are conversations that you need to have internationally, not just in the United States. Colombia and Venezuela, I'm sure, had problems with migrations too. Mexico and Guatemala. Nicaragua and Costa Rica. It's not just the United States, although I will say United States is the biggest culprit of all of that. But
And speaking just to my which is
Yeah, go ahead.
it is very difficult. This is the fifth country I have lived in. I have visited 30 countries, and this is the fifth country. I went from Mexico to the USA, to England, to France, and then like this is Colombia, and I have so much fear of being deported or doing something wrong, or that it's just I'm not even even just trying to get visa issues resolved, and migration just is so difficult. And I don't know what else you need to vet for me. Well, my life is online on what's left. I don't have any. I don't. It's so challenging, and so I feel for what every single time. Whether I was in England, I couldn't get paid legally. I had to get paid under the table. Or whether it was in France, I had to also get paid under the table. Whether I'm here in Colombia now, I have to try to apply for whatever to be an interpreter. There's some they give priority over someone else over me, and I get that. But it's like just trying to resolve these issues as a migrant in another country. It's always a challenge. Andy, you were going to say something profound. Go ahead.
Well, there was two things I wanted to say about him. I think I only remembered one of them, unfortunately. The first thing, I really think it's important what you said about this notion of destroying American culture. I think there is an American culture, but American culture was largely a melting pot notion. The myth of the melting pot, the myth of the bring us your poor, you're tired, you're wretched, and of diversity. And our strength is our multiculturalism, or through the fact that we are not a monoculture. That, if you want to say anything, and there's a myth there, but that's our myth. Our myth is one of Thanksgiving, where the Native Americans and the Pilgrims got together. Okay, I can be cynical about that, but that's our myth, right? Our myth is actually one of sharing. Our myth is actually one of melding. Okay, under a flag, I get it. But if you really want to talk about cultures being destroyed, you have to find out what the World Bank and the IMF is doing to South America to basically force to say, if you are an indigenous planter who wants to plant food or develop a product that you're going to use internally, they will not give you a cent. The only money they're going to give you is money, or lend you, not give you, lend you, is for something where you are going to export it out of your country, trying to undermine actually the local businesses there, the local planters, the indigenous culture. These institutions are creating a monoculture, first off, and they are destroying the cultures across the globe. It is not people moving across boundaries or borders that destroy cultures. It is the action of capitalist nation states basically using capital to enforce its will on any people, whether it's the imperial country doing it in a colonial country or imperial country doing it on its own people. That is what has destroyed cultures and is destroying cultures. And this notion that people walking across a border destroys culture, actually, that's called meeting other people. And actually out of that usually comes more culture and more a richer, like it's how blends of music come together, or blends of art styles and things like that. Sports, more interest, these are the things that start to take place when people share like that. And I also think that the point that Eduardo made, or I don't know if it was you that also made it, Hema, like this thing that it is not a small thing that Guatemala protects its border, or that Nicaragua protects its border, or that Mexico protects its border. They're not the big fry that the United States is in terms of how it does it. But all capitalist states have to do this, because all of them are built into this game of using those borders really ultimately as ideological prison pens for people inside those things to say, we're here to save you. We get to exploit you. You owe something to me, whether I'm AMLO in Mexico or Biden in the United States, and those are just leaders representing a larger capitalist class in their respective countries. And finally, well, not finally, I shouldn't say, but the other point I want to get to is the answer to this. I do feel like is in partly in that thing you talked about, Hema, when you mentioned the UN study that said that these NGOs that send money or do money are 3 times less effective than actually just letting fucking people move across boundaries and send money. We all know this. Even the freedom people know that local people figuring out what they do with their own money is the way you empower people. And here the UN is actually literally admitting it. Now, what they don't want to admit, and I think that 3 times is probably a lie, because I actually suspect that the money that the NGOs are actually harming those countries, are actually doing damage. Like, because it's always a strings attached. We'll give you this little piece of cheese, but you got to do this other sort of thing. I know the UN's not going to admit that, but on their own terms, they are saying that regular people just doing their own thing will create more abundance for community than having these institutions do it. And that is the message that I think was supposed to be in the freedom movement, and we're forgetting it, and we are falling again for this trap of somehow we've got to allow the state to come and protect us. From who? From what? We actually need to protect ourselves from our state. And if you put any sort of control in the state's hands, it's going to be used against us one way or another at some point down the line.
I even think that might, in the long run, if uninterfered with, if you've left it alone, I actually think that might solve the big immigration problem. If you allow these countries and communities to heal themselves, to rebuild, to restructure, because I know that if it were up to me, I'd be in my home country. Most immigrants that I talk to, they want to be home. They don't want to be here. It's a sacrifice for them. It's not they're coming, even that whole American dream. I actually think that you're not giving credit to a lot of the immigrants. I do believe that while they might not be college educated or even high school or middle school or elementary graduated, they're smart enough to know that this is not an American dream, that they're going to come here and eat shit, work their asses off to help. It's a sacrifice to them. What was it, that 14-year-old kid that was caught? He said, I'm just coming here to work hard and help my family build a house. They understand. They're not coming here to make it rich. It's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice to expose yourself to the elements and to the narcs and to ice and to So people are taking the pill and falling for the bullshit, making it harder.
And one last thing I wanted to share, because I was actually surprised by this. This was a recent, I don't know, it was an Oxfam study that talked about actual jobs that immigrants take, and it said the top occupations with the highest share of immigrant workers, the largest one was manicurists and pedicurists. They were occupying 74.6% of those jobs. Then you got to like graders and sorters of agricultural products. That was a big one. Plasters and stucco masons, taxi drivers, drywall installers. Number 5, ceiling tiles represented 50% of the jobs being taken there. So, look, I mean, if you want to be a manicurist, maybe you would say, "Oh, the immigrants are taking my jobs." And I'm not saying you should or should not be a manicurist, but people are just trying to make a living. That's all people are trying to do, and that's why I think when Eduardo asked you him about, "Hey, if I go from one state to another," that's what all of us are doing. Like, if the jobs aren't to be found in California, we're going to go somewhere else. And if I don't like the situation in California, I'm going to go somewhere else. And all me and Eduardo are saying is that same, and we're not even really free to do that because you've got to register your car, or you've got to like show your ID when you get on that plane. So there's not even freedom really there, but that's less restriction than, so we'll call that freedom, if you will. We would just say people should just be free to move where they need to, because we think people know what they need to do for themselves. And that would create a better world just doing that.
Self-determination. Just let people. Yeah.
And I love what you said, Eduardo, about, that actually, let's all be undocumented. Ultimately, because honestly, the people dealing with the 4th Industrial Revolution, that's what you're saying, folks. You recognize, you see how the internet, trap is coming in, and you're basically saying, how do I get out from under it? How do I make it so that I don't have a signal? What you're trying to do is becoming undocumented on the internet. Well, that's all these folks are trying to do. Is like they're trying to find a way of getting across without somebody saying, I'm going to control you on the process. So we should understand what they're trying to do, and we're all trying to do it. We will all need to do it. We're all undocumented. We're all trying to be undocumented at the end of the day. We're trying to make it so the government does not have our shit.
Yeah.
Lastly, I think that the last thing I'll say is, Glenn Greenwald is no longer my boyfriend.
You broke up?
Yeah, they did. They did.
Can I get the wedding registry gift back?
He has a lot of great stuff. I really like him, but I don't know what is the point of him trying to explain a lower court versus a higher court, and even just trying to sort of side with the lower court versus the higher court so that he could just say that they were right on this issue. I think that Glenn Greenwald hasn't, I don't know what he's trying, if he's trying to appease a certain audience, I'm not sure, or what, but so what? Like, fuck whatever the legal stance was or whatever. Like, what is your position? And he doesn't really state what his position is, but he insinuates. He doesn't directly outstate it. But he has been with a person who had migrate immigration issues, his late husband, and couldn't get to the U.S. and also had been stopped and also has been vetted and also has been in a not in a detention center per se, but like detained. That was the word I was trying to look for at a migration point. And he, of all people, I feel should be on the side of borders, of someone who should clearly state out. You know what? Like we have people abusing powers of this sort of vetting process, and so I feel he's been very disingenuous. He's discussed late into the game, discussed what happens when you have people taking something as COVID to try to justify reasons why there should be measures, safety measures, right? And then suddenly forgetting how many people can abuse this sort of power. So I just think he's been disingenuous in this whole thing, and he's been defending Texas in the border control security measure. And I don't have any. I'm not going to say that you should be on the side of me. We should agree with everything, but he's not consistent. That's what I want to say. He's not consistent with his principles, and that's what I don't like about him right now, is that he's not being consistent with what he thinks about COVID, what he knows about censorship, and what he was a champion for, which is a freedom of movement, or rather a freedom of speech, a freedom of lesser regulation by the government. And here he is, supporting regulation by the government on people. So that's disingenuous on his part. I just want to state that comment because I remember you had mentioned Glenn Greenwald in our group message, and I had looked him up, and seeing all that kind of infuriated me, how hypocritical he's been. That's all I have to say.
The last thing I want to say is, we didn't discuss it here, and I'm glad we didn't discuss it, but I do want to kind of just make a note of it for all of these people now that are saying, oh, the United States is about to head into civil war because these 25 states are coming to support Texas, and this is Texas being good old the Lone Star State and giving the FU to the government. We should all be like that. Stop. Again, you're falling for the facade. It's not going to happen. It's not. The implications of it, they know. They are, and these politicians and these people in power, they're telling you, yeah, they're literally just putting on a 3-ring circus for you. Don't pay no mind to that. That's not what's really going on. Okay, it's not going to happen. Because I also think that deters people from actual revolution, because they think, see, it can be done via government ways. It can be done, but it can't. It's not. It's not going to.
Yeah, and that's where I want to say is, like, these people who are putting on a theater of differences, the Republican Party over here and the 25 Republican governor states that were saying we're going to fight for protecting your jobs, versus these other people who are going to say we're going to fight for, humanity towards the immigrants. The other 25 states that are saying they're well-meaning. None of them believe any of that stuff. This is all a theater of. They all agree that the border is going to be controlled one way or another, that they're going to control the flow of workers externally because they're going to control the flow of workers internally. They all agree to essentially ongoing war with Taiwan, with China through Taiwan. They all agree with continuing to fund Israel. They all, for its decimation of the Middle East, and ultimately to going to war with Iran, because that's what's going to have to happen, a wider regional war. They all agreed at making sure that Ukraine doesn't lose, and somehow Russia continues to get bled, even though they have differences over some of those things. They all agree that the rich have to get richer. They all agree that U.S. corporations have to be given more power to extract resources across the globe. They all agree on basically the fact that workers are going to have to give over more and more of their freedoms for actually, the world and the environment to be protected. So they all agree on that. There's no debate. They're just trying to fool you in this one area where there isn't even a debate there, that this is an issue you should be paying attention to, and that you can make a decision about, maybe I'm going to vote for that party because of this issue versus this party because of that issue. It's just, what do they call it? That's a wedge issue. It's a wedge issue that's just fake. What it's doing is obscuring all the areas that they actually are. Once they get elected, this is what they plan on doing. They're going to just hit you with bullshit after bullshit after bullshit, and they're going to use some of this technology that they're using on the border against you. It's coming, and it's already here, but it's going to come for more.
I think that when we continue to cover this, I think I'll include some of the latest developments, because, since we've covered this way back when we started What's Left, I don't think we covered exactly, we covered just drones, or maybe in 2022, we may have just covered, sonar radars or whatever. I have just to be left, I'm leaving this for people, if people want to continue doing the further research on how there's a lot of high-tech technology, militarized border. I'm just going to read this from Political, before, because I just wanted to share this. It's okay. There is, late last year, Frontex, and Frontex, for people, if Frontex is the EU agency that manages the external borders and the Coast Guard of the EU and its partners. Frontex, they awarded contracts to Airbus, an Israeli weapons company. It's always Israel. If anyone wants to be where your position is versus Palestine and Israel, you should understand that if you support Israel, they're the biggest manufacturers for the greatest surveillance technology. I mean, even in my country, we've covered this. They've sold great surveillance technology in Mexico to track down the Zapatistas. We're going to do an episode on guerrilla forces in other countries. And Israeli weapons company Elbit Systems to develop military-grade drones meant to track down boats carrying refugees in the Mediterranean Sea. Germany has been developing a technology that tries to identify where refugees come from based on their voice. This is new. And earlier this year, Greece unveiled, according to Molnar, the most viscerally violent of them all, sound cannons which emit a high-pitched, loud sound meant to deter people from coming close enough to the country's land border. And so, I mean, just to think about the surveillance, and then thinking of military-grade drones, and then also voice recognition. I mean, if anyone is discussing any sort of treasonous thing against the government, you could just be tracked down with your voice, Anyhow, so I'll just share more to come. If we do another episode on this, I'll prepare for more high-tech technology that is being developed, that will continue to be developed.
I think we should do an episode on geofencing.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. All right, let's get going. Yeah. Well, thank you for again suggesting this, and Kama, thanks it was really adequate for you to be a part of this, because I hadn't heard your position, and I'm glad you participated with us.
Yeah.
And we'll have this ongoing issue again beyond humanitarian crisis to really for our safety of our lives, everywhere. All right, so we'll do this. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, or Rumble or Telegram, and you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes wherever you found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something further, suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. And I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Gema Aburto Sotomayor and Andy Lawson. Thank you all very much. We'll check us out in the next episode. Ciao.
Yes.